Good evening and a very warm welcome on behalf of Milim to another special presentation. Welcome to you wherever you are in the UK and indeed wherever you might be in the world. Our series of online talks and conversations continues with our guest, Lord John Mann of Holbeck Moor, and I'll introduce Lord Mann to you in just a moment, along with Simon Myerson, who will be in conversation with him. A little bit of housekeeping first. Please do ask questions. Do this by typing whatever you'd like to ask into the Q&A facility on your screen. As always, we will do our best to get through as many of your questions as we can. You'll also notice a chat facility on your screen, and this will allow you to send a message to all of the other participants on this webinar, should you wish to do so. Finally, we are recording this event and it will be posted on the Milim website at milim.org.uk in the next few days. There you will find recordings of other past events, as well as details of our future programme for which you can book tickets. And so to our guest. Lord Mann was born in Leeds and attended Bradford Grammar School and then the University of Manchester. Active in the Labour Party since his youth, he worked for the trade union movement as well as in business before being elected as MP for Bassetlaw in 2001, a post he held until 2019. During much of this time, he chaired the all-party parliamentary group against anti-Semitism. After announcing that he would not be standing as an MP in the 2019 general election in order to take up a role as the government's anti-Semitism advisor, he was given a life peerage as Baron Mann of Holbeck Moor. Lord Mann was last with us in 2020, and it is indeed a pleasure to welcome him back. It's also a great pleasure to welcome Simon Myerson KC, Chair of the Leeds Jewish Representative Council. Simon has been a barrister since 1986, becoming a QC in 2003. I'm sure you're all eager to hear from our guests, so without further ado, I will hand over to Simon and Lord Mann.
Thanks. Evening all. I think that the sensible place to start with Lord Mann is just to ask you to say a few words about the Board of Deputies Commission on Antisemitism, which you're jointly chairing, so that everybody understands the topicality of today's conversation. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, good evening. I certainly can, and it was an accurate introduction all round. I should say, Lord Mann of Holbeck Moor in the city of Leeds, as I like to tell them in the House of Lords, in case they've forgotten or don't know. The Board of Deputies has asked us to, I can't tell you what the Board of Deputies is expecting. I can tell you what Penny and I are doing. We're going to come up with some added value, with some recommendations to add value to what's happening, perhaps as well to turn the screw on things that aren't working properly that should be working better. And I am certain we'll have some micro recommendations that will make a difference, albeit obviously a small difference, and possibly some major ones. And I think we might be moving quite quickly. We may even have interim recommendations, because we've seen a number of things that aren't happening, and I think we'll produce some stuff that's challenging to government, that's challenging across government. So in the public sector, for example, is challenging to private employers, and I think some of it will be challenging to the Jewish community, or to Jewish communal organisations, and indeed, I would say, I hope it will be. So that's the parameters. Any good ideas people have got, but really, especially on things we might not have thought about, then we're up for good ideas, because if we can make lots of little differences, that would be very worthwhile. And I think that's possibly going to be our biggest strength.
Good. So let's start in then. The background to this is a huge increase in anti-Semitic incidents since the start of the war in Gaza, and in fact, if one is being entirely accurate, before that, because the beginning of the increase was the 7th of October, and at that stage nothing had happened except the deaths of Israelis and their kidnappings. To what extent do you think that this is hatred of Israel playing out as an attack on the Jewish community, or is it, do you think, anti-Zionism spilling over into attacks on Jews? What comes first?
I think there's more than that, and I think it's worse than that. Without question, there are attacks on anything Israel, and that's going to be a bigger problem. I give an example. I've just not that long ago, I was in Amsterdam, meeting with the 3 biggest football clubs in the Netherlands, with Jewish supporters of them, with the Jewish community, with the mayor of Amsterdam, with the police, looking at what had happened a month or 2 before in Amsterdam at a football match involving Maccabi Tel Aviv. And my conclusion is that there will be increased and regular attacks of every nature attempted whenever Israelis are seen to be doing something abroad. So Israeli musicians, other performers, Israeli football teams, and that's going to become a feature of everything in a far bigger way than it has. And this country is not going to be worse than elsewhere, but neither are we going to be in the slightest immune from that. So that's one problem. A second problem is the consequence of that, which is, I think we will find a reluctance to have Israeli artists, let's say, that could be painters, it could be musicians or whatever, allowed to display, to perform, to join in. And I think there will be a silent racism that builds up when people will be thinking, well, I've got a comedy venue. Do I really want the hassle of having an Israeli on the bill? How about I just go for the easy life and I'll book somebody else? We will see that. And now if that's an Israeli, a silent boycott. But I think as well, we are seeing, not will see, are seeing the same thing for British Jewish people. Because the venue promoters, as an example, are not always choosing to differentiate. And indeed, there's lots of evidence of that happening already. And so we're seeing this huge spillover from anti-Israel into anti-Jewish people, persons, including very much individually in this country. But as well, we're also seeing a resurrection of a deep-rooted prejudice among some people, which is an anti-Jewish prejudice. And Israel's merely an excuse for the prejudice to come out, or the conflict involved in Israel. And there, that again is having some profound impact. And in particular, I am worried not so much about the recorded statistics. There's a trend upwards, or there has been. I think there'll be a bit of levelling up at the moment going on, because the spite was while there was a conflict on our televisions every night, but the organized ostracization deliberately to remove individual Jewish people from their workplace, from their pastimes, from being part of anything. And that is happening. People aren't talking about it, which is fully understandable. I find out about it very third hand normally. And when we're able to intervene, we can turn that round, is my experience. But a lot of it, people are simply being silent. And that's the most pernicious use of racism that there is. And that, without question, is on the increase. And I think it's the biggest single problem that we have to address this year.
That is really interesting, because I hear about it firsthand. My postbag is bulging, and it is very much. I don't want to embarrass anybody who may be listening, and I can't give private information without permission in any event. But if you work for a big organisation, and in this city, that is the NHS and the university, then if you are Jewish, the odds are good that your life will be made more difficult. And at the same time, one of the big issues has been for the city, the marches through the city centre. Now, none of this will come on to particular instances where this may not be true, but broadly, this doesn't affect Jewish people in their homes, although they bring their unhappiness from work home with them, obviously. But what it has in common is that we are reliant on the courage of others. Because, and I absolutely agree with what you've said, the difficulty we have is that the venues, the employers, the people who run the institutions often find that it's easier to take no notice of us than to, as it were, grab the tiger by the tail. And because we're talking publicly, I want to make clear that does not include West Yorkshire Police, but it certainly does include other organisations and other public figures. Is there anything that can be done to ensure that the people who are supposed to uphold liberal democracy, by which I mean actually stand for the core ideas in which we are all supposed at least to believe, is there any way to hold them accountable before the event rather than complaining about it afterwards?
There's lots of ways, but let me start by saying there's certainly problems in the university for Jewish employees, as Jewish students. There's certainly problems in the health service, but this is well beyond those, well beyond the university and the NHS. You know, the new MP in Leicester runs a private health operation, a big one across Leicester, entirely private sector. And I wouldn't be comfortable going there. Small restaurants, small bars, small cafes. It's the kind of place which is actually the front line of people being ostracized. Young people living together, where the Jewish person in, say, a shared flat of 4 people suddenly finds themselves not invited out with the rest, and in essence gets shunned in a very silent way and feels obliged to move. The person working perhaps professionally in a small workplace, who gets hassle at work and decides to move elsewhere because they're fed up of it. These are the things that have become very common. And I think people are fearful of even talking about it. And the one big glimmer of hope I have is I've encouraged this. I'm not the only one, by the way, but we're seeing a plethora of Jewish self-organization, a plethora. We're seeing in workplaces, large employers, Jewish self-organization. And I'm lining up some training for those who are doing that organization so they know exactly where they stand legally if there are issues that need addressing. And we're seeing that a lot. Some of these are manifesting as WhatsApp groups within organizations. That's still a powerful form of organization. And there are, I would say now, literally thousands of such networks, most of them discreet, but some of them going to, for example, large employers and getting recognized. And that's hugely powerful. We have a network of 7 different major entities in Canary Wharf where there is a Jewish organization in each workplace that itself meets together collectively every month. And there we're talking, I would say, more than 5,000 people involved. So there are some upsides to what's going on. We need to get a lot better organized, and thinking through what that means, what organizing means, how you help groups like, Facebook groups that are basically support groups that people have set up, is really where things are at the moment, in my view.
Right. And when it comes to the commission that you're running for the Board of Deputies, is it, as it were, outward facing only? So you will be making recommendations, presumably about changes to organisational structures and the way that organisations behave, and perhaps legislation. But will you be looking inwards as well, so that you might, for example, publish a help sheet or a "this is how to do it" guide for exactly Jewish groups like that?
Absolutely we will. And let me tell you, we may have to jump very early. One of the things I want to see, every time we have a session, everyone says, well, I want training in my organisation, my group, my workplace, my social setting. Everyone wants training on anti-Semitism getting done. And everyone says it's important. And I ask everyone, well, who should do it? And it's proved what I thought I knew for definite. There is no capacity to do that training. So one of the things that has to happen is we need to establish, as a matter of urgency, some kind of Jewish training agency that trains the trainers. So it trains up people so that they can go and be confident, and I think helpfully consistent, wherever there is a need, to explain what anti-Semitism is, say to an employer, say to a community organisation, say to a council, whoever it might be, a sports group. And we've got to up that professionalism. And I want to see that in place this year. I think it's absolutely vital. So I'm jumping the gun by telling you, but also I've been meeting the larger communal organisations and saying, we have to do it. And I'm already saying to government, perhaps government should put some money in to kickstart that so it happens quicker. That really kind of self-organisation, and the strengthening of it, but then backing it up with something that can be done that can make a difference. I think is vital and is doable.
That's interesting. Then let me ask you some pretty specific questions that will help the people watching. Firstly, do you want largely individual submissions, or would you like submissions coordinated by groups?
Both.
Secondly, is there a value in people putting headings on their submissions, because the universities, police, councils, marches, those are things that people are really worried about, and would it help to be able to, as it were, sort those by the content?
The more I'm a simple man. A pen is obviously far more sophisticated than I am, but the simpler you make it for us, the better. No, the most wonderful contribution will be someone saying, look, I've just got this one small idea, but I think it could make a difference. That might be a couple of paragraphs. But if it's something we haven't thought of, we've got some gems already up our sleeve. I'm not going to reveal them all now. That not least because we haven't formally agreed them between ourselves. But we've definitely got some gems up our sleeves that will surprise people, shock them a bit, but are immediately deliverable and easily deliverable.
Okay.
And one of the interesting things is why these things haven't been addressed before as well, by the way. I find that worrying, but also fascinating. Some of the things we've learned, why didn't I know about them before? I'm asking myself. Why has no one else been raising? Why aren't people talking about them? Because there's some stunning stuff coming through. And the more practical, we want outcomes. We know the problem, I think. And we know it well, too well. You know it too well. What should we do is what we're there for.
And can I ask you this, because I'm looking at the questions and we will get to them, the ones people are putting forward, although I don't promise to ask them all. But do you want contributions that simply say, I am worried about this? Or are you looking for suggestions for answers?
I think if people want to express a specific concern, giving some backdrop to that, we know the community is concerned. We know, I think, how concerned it is. So we don't need that simply reinforcing, but if it's specific, this is a problem that I have encountered. I'm getting more and more people who are saying, don't want you to make this public. Well, we won't make anything public, I can tell you. It's all confidential. But, this happened to me and I don't like it. And I want you to know that's useful. If there's specific suggestions of what might be done,
right,
that's helpful as well.
Let me ask the big one, really. Should the Home Secretary or the Commissioner of the Met have stepped in earlier to put conditions on the marches that were going through London?
I'm not sure that's the big one. I think it's a big one. And the reason I don't think it's the big one is I am much more worried about organised extremism, including Islamist extremism, targeting Jewish people and the impact on people's lives than a crowd wandering through London, shouting abuse, etc. I think that's a bigger danger for us. However, on the marches, yes, I think there's a lack of imagination. I think there's a lack of flexibility, and I think there's a lack of common sense. And some of it could have been dealt with, I think, quite straightforwardly. And that's encouraged extremists, which is in itself a problem.
So then that leads to this question. How do you define what you mean by extremism in this context.
So I do a lot of monitoring of this. We have a weakness in this country. The definition of extremism in this country, in reality, is people liable to commit acts of violence, including terrorism. And that's very important that those people, we attempt to stop them, we attempt to intervene early, we break up, we arrest, we jail, we do everything to disrupt and stop the creation of such people, the indoctrination, in other words, of them, and their organisation. So that has to be priority number one, unambiguously, and has to always be properly funded. We can do more in that, but I think we're good at that. The second kind of extremist is expressly not violent, not terrorist, and therefore the criminal law doesn't work. And if we try and use the criminal law to deal with people who are not breaking the law, we spend an awful lot of time dancing on the pin of the head of how near are they getting, oh, they said this, oh, they said that. Whereas they're busy taking down decent people by getting pilings on them, or by their silence are intimidating people out of jobs, out of homes, off courses sometimes, out of teams, sports teams. And that, I think, is far more invidious. The worst examples I've seen are where people have had to leave their normal life, the way they live it, because people have ostracized them. The impact on someone on that, particularly young people, but the impact on everyone is huge. On young people, that can be not just devastating, but life-changing, and not helpfully so. And so those kind of extremists, I don't think we're good at dealing with. And we can't rely on the criminal law to get anywhere near them. They're smart enough not to break the law. And we mustn't ignore those types anymore. And I think we have done for a long time in this country. That's a big weakness.
So what would you suggest, broadly speaking? Because there is legislation that permits the civil remedies, but it's always individuals against individuals. It's always slow and it's always expensive.
Yes, but Sam, you're a solicitor.
Barrister, don't worry.
A barrister, sorry. Oh, well, let's say you're a solicitor working in a solicitor's firm, and there's 10 of you in the office, and 2 of the 10 are hostile to you, and you're in that office every day. We're not going to succeed using the law.
No.
To change that kind of problem.
I agree.
We have to use education. We have to use employer sanction and therefore employer education. We need to get new tools for dealing with that. Now, if you then have to leave that solicitor's practice, that's a problem.
Yeah.
The fact that you do is a problem. Now, you imagine if you're a 20-year-old living in Leeds with 3 other people. Not necessarily a student, might be a student, but not necessarily. And because you are Jewish and you mildly pro-Israel, no more than that, just mildly, you think it's appalling that there were hostages taken and murdered, and you think they should have been released earlier, and you think there should be the breaking up of Hamas. Nothing extreme, just mild stuff. And you're Jewish and they know it. And they don't talk to you because of that. The fact you've got to leave your flat, house, and find somewhere else to live because of who you are, that's major league. Major league. And that's the problem that I'm dealing with more than anything, those kind of problems. And I'm finding people are reluctant to talk about it.
Yeah,
People
I
are
can see.
scared.
Yeah, I can see
And
that.
they're scared. I think people are scared of two things. They're scared of the things they're not sure about, but appear to be dangerous and potentially violent and extreme and threatening. The noise on the streets, the things they hear. But people are also scared that it can come for them in ways they hadn't realized. And that, I call it the intimidation of silence. I think that's a very big battleground. We need new approaches, and Jewish self-organization, i.e. Jewish people in the arts, for example, where there's a plethora of new groups have been set up, becomes vital. What I'm looking at is, can I find finance? Can I find facility to bring those people together so that they're discussing how best they can work together to strengthen and consolidate some very impromptu, ad hoc, but very positive fight backs that have been across all walks of life. And I would bet 200 people on this tonight that probably the overwhelming majority are in several such groups already. Well, that's a good thing. How do we strengthen? That's, I think, an issue where people like me need to find a way of adding a bit extra value and helping that. And in some areas, in some walks of life, in the arts world, there's lots of things that I can help, not me, but me and others can help do. In the sports world, it's already working, it's working really well. In the universities, in the NHS, in big employers, I can see how to do it. How do we deal with the small pubs, cafes, restaurants in the city of Leeds? I'm less clear on that.
Right. What I'm going to do is to move to the questions that we've been asked. There are 16 of them, but in fact, some of them aren't questions, some of them are comments, which is absolutely fine. I'm not going to ask the one at the top, not because the question, how much longer do Jewish communities have to put up with pro-Palestinian anti-Semitic marches that blight our streets, because I think we are here to talk largely about what we can do going forward, rather than to sound off, as it were, about an experience that we are all having. There is, though, a question about the BBC, which is going to be an issue for the community, I know. In particular, when are they going to start calling Hamas terrorists? Because there is a question of public perception here, and it is insidious. It gets into everybody's home every day. Is there anything that you're planning on that, or is that outside your remit, really?
There's nothing outside my remit because I make it up. So there's only so many hours in the day. That's often the problem. But yeah, no, there's a lot of direct engagement, and it's pretty heavy engagement with the BBC. I'm involved in quite a lot of it. There is a Jewish staff network in the BBC, and that has been very vocal and has had a lot of support from the outside. There are quite a number of training initiatives on anti-Semitism across the BBC going on. But there's a lot more to do. I'm certainly not complacent in the slightest in relation to issues there. But I should say, I'm not just looking at the BBC, I'm looking at Sky, I'm looking at the other broadcasters. I'm looking at, Good Morning Britain, and what it did or didn't do on the Holocaust. I'm looking at some of the newspapers as well. So one can never ignore X and Hate Book and YouTube which have more of it than everyone else put together every day. So there's a lot of challenges there, but those battles are with the media are more advanced than they are with the internet companies. I can certainly say that. A lot more advanced.
I mean, one of the ways to deal with the internet companies is simply to say that if it's on their site, they're publishers.
I don't need persuading of that, but
No,
I've failed
but
to
I think the
persuade
government does.
successive governments
Yeah,
that they should have publishers' liability so that you and I can sue them.
Yeah.
I think that would be a game changer.
absolutely it would. But
And I think if that's the critical thing to do, in my view.
Yeah.
You know, I can sue a newspaper, you can sue a newspaper, we can join together and sue a newspaper. I can warn newspapers of that. That's why we don't see these problems in newspapers very often. Can't do that with the internet.
No, they call themselves a platform.
So that is one for legislators. That's one. Let's see what Penny has to say when we decide on this. I think she's got strong views like me, but that's one for legislators, government, parliament, in fact, rather than the Jewish community cozying up to Elon Musk is not going to solve the problem.
No. There are two questions which really are very similar, which is, will there be increased, or are you going to, or are you minded to recommend increased training for police forces?
Yes, we're going to be meeting frontline police officers rather than, I mean, I meet the top brass regularly enough. We may go to them after we've got recommendations, I think. We're meeting frontline police officers, and we want to know what lack of is. You know, we suspect there's a lack of consistency. We've had evidence on that.
Yeah,
that's a problem. There should be the same response everywhere. You know, what is the training? What's the training in the College of Policing? That's not very powerful these days. Do police officers know what anti-Semitism is? Well, if they don't, how are they going to deal with it? It's fairly obvious to me that a police officer can't deal with a problem if they don't know what the problem is. And so police training, NHS training, every trust I'd like to see trained, every university, and I'm in battles inside government. We've got money to do work in universities. I think I'm winning those battles. Time will tell. We'll know soon. But I want to see high quality training going in that gets to the people who need to hear it, and then ongoing training so that what's learned is put into action. But I see that for across society. You know, arts venues, as an example, the theatres in Leeds, the comedy venues in Leeds need to be trained on the basics of anti-Semitism. I think that's essential.
Yeah.
And that's not an add-on as a minor thing. I would say that's fundamental, because how are they going to deal with what happens in the playhouse if someone interrupts and, quote, protests? Someone interrupts and abuses a Jewish performer, Israeli or otherwise. What's their reaction going to be to that is absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
And I don't think they have, if I'm polite, I don't think they have been given the opportunity to learn enough to have the skills to deal with that situation.
No, I agree. And we have an issue with venues in Leeds platforming overtly anti-Semitic performers, and the Rep Council has written, and we've had some assistance from local MPs, and it has gone down not at all.
No, but then requiring people to have training, and getting high quality training becomes an absolute imperative. That's not the solution, but it's part of the solution.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let me ask, there's an interesting suggestion in the box. Might the answer be that any organisation that gets government or public funding be required to ensure they've met appropriate and published statements so all faiths and beliefs are respected, or no funding? Well, there is a public sector equality duty, which is a statutory duty to try and promote tolerance and equality. It's very often honoured in the breach more than the observance, but there may be something there.
I mean, I cannot reveal what might be in our mind for major recommendations, but that does sound like contract compliance.
Does.
And contract compliance could be extremely powerful as a tool.
Thank you. Another question, and this is partly on the screen and partly was sent to me in advance. People who've been involved in interfaith, intercommunity work prior to October the 7th, Jewish people, are almost unanimously in a state of despair, because either it is impossible to talk, or what one might call the price for the entry ticket is to say something that is essentially Israel went too far. And there is also an issue with the various Muslim organizations and what the Jewish community perceives as their stance. Can you offer, I mean, this is a bit outside the scope of the Antisemitism Commission, perhaps, but can you offer any words of advice about that? Because we are going to need people to talk to.
I can't give advice. It's not, you know, I have facilitated a group of young leading Jewish and Muslim professionals who will be sitting down together, not with the king, but very near the king, in the next 4 weeks. I think it's going to be a success. From that, I think there will be some good ideas come forward.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting to see. I've put them together residentially for 2 days. I'm not running it. A young Muslim and a young Jewish person are running it. I'm very encouraged that it will get into what the options are. And if they manage to come up with some options, even if they don't agree on their preferred ones, that could be very, very useful. And will need to think how I'm able to then disseminate that rapidly.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. I'm in touch.
I think there will be so I'm not going to name names or give any indication. Oh, no. I think there will be 1 or 2 people from Leeds participating.
I'm interested in that because I'm involved in an Israeli NGO that is doing almost exactly that with Israelis and Palestinians. And they have had some astonishing results, even from people who started a residential by saying, we're not going to talk to them. So here's hoping, because we are really going to need it. Somebody anonymous has asked a question that I was going to ask you, so I'll ask it now. Do you think Prevent does any good?
I think Prevent needs significant change. Is my diplomatic answer.
Right.
Yes, can Prevent do some good? Of course it can.
That
does, you know, if Prevent gets a 16-year-old who's going off the rails and is veering towards terrorism and pulls them back in, that's worth an awful lot. But I'm not convinced that Prevent is doing as much as it could.
Are you going to address it, or is that for something else or a different channel?
we will attempt to, but whether we can through, I'm not sure we will get very far through this inquiry. I think we might come up with something interesting that will help the debate on how to turn prevent into something more useful. And if we could do that, that would be a big achievement.
I agree.
So I don't think I'm going to say prevent should do X, Y, Z in this way, because I don't think we'll get anywhere doing that. But I think there is an issue of how prevent sees its work that we could influence, and I hope we can. If not, I shall do it on my own. But if I can use the force of the commission, that would be more effective.
Yeah, I agree. Do you think that the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, about which there's been a bit of stop-start, is going to make an impact?
To be honest, I regard it as somewhat irrelevant when the last government brought it in. I regard it as somewhat irrelevant. It's been watered down a bit, and this government's continuing with it. I mean, I understand why they want it in there, which is all to do with the perception that some voices are not allowed to be heard in universities. To be honest, when it comes to the Jewish community, that's not really been the problem.
I agree.
It's one thing I'm considering, and if people have got feedback on this, I would be keen to receive it, because I'm still not sure. But I was going to put it to Penny. I haven't yet. But I'm thinking that it might be a good idea to allow universities on their own land. So I'm thinking, say, of Leeds University here, to have the power to restrict the amplification of sound. So the ability to say, well, you want to have your protest, well, that's free speech, but you're not having a megaphone and a sound system alongside it to disrupt everyone in every lecture and every exam and all over the campus. And I don't see a contradiction with free speech and saying, no, you're not having a megaphone. You know, you've got your placards, you can stand there, but you're not having a megaphone. You're not disrupting people inside the buildings and all over the campus. Now, again, I think that might be quite helpful, but perhaps I've got that wrong, and I'd be keen on people's feedbacks from this call.
You can have mine. I think that's an absolutely fascinating idea, and I'd like to reflect on that. I've been at Leeds University and I've seen some of the stuff that's gone on, and I'd say the same about some council meetings I've been to, not in Leeds but in South Yorkshire. And you're right, of course, it strikes you at the time as bullying. It's just an attempt to impose your views on everyone else, whether they want to hear them or not. But that is quite an interesting idea, if I may say so, and one that people can reflect on. Can I ask this question generally? A lot of the questions in the box and a lot of the comments are essentially start off with the assumption this is all terrible and it needs to be stopped. Can I ask you this? Palestinian flags, kafirs, demonstrations that are not violent and don't call for violence, are those things that concern you? I ought to say, to make it clear to everybody, they don't particularly concern me.
But the things go in fashions. We could spend a lot of time chasing every flag that anyone waves, but that can backfire. So I did a deal with football on the 10th of October, 18 months ago. And I said, look, this is going to escalate in a very big way, obviously. well, it has escalated. I think you should ban Israeli and Palestinian flags inside football stadiums and inside any football venue. And they agreed. I think that has worked because we've not had the battle of the flags. And I could name when there's been flags. There was one Israeli flag at the first England match at Wembley. There was a Palestinian flag that was put up at Liverpool Football Club. There was an Israeli flag rather randomly at Stockport County at one match. And then there's been an Israeli flag, and I know who carries it, at several Leeds United matches. And every time that Manor Solomon scores, it's waved. And there's been a few at Tottenham. But I think the not having a battle of the flags in football has been very, very helpful, because it's allowed people to go and particularly to watch football in large crowds without having to take all that battling with them. So I'm interested in getting the extremists and breaking the extremist organisations. That's what I'm interested in as a priority, not the flags that they're waving or even the banners that they're carrying around. Sometimes that's helpful to do them over, but I'm interested in breaking the organisations that are running this. That's my motivation. If that's my strategy, as much as I've got one.
I think the answer to the two people who've said why hasn't it worked at Celtic is because they're not members of the Premier League or the English.
So at Celtic, I could choose my words carefully here. I've been I'm not a lone voice, but there aren't many voices who've been trying to tackle the issue in Scottish football.
Yeah.
And I've engaged with Celtic. They've banned their so-called Green Brigade, got 5,000 of them banned first of all. Then a further 1,500 were banned. So there has been action taken, but you're dealing with a range of different issues. And as we find with football in particular, you try and stop someone doing something, then you get more people trying to do it just because someone's tried to stop someone doing something. So what I'm anticipating, and I'm in Scotland on Wednesday, and I'm going back to Scotland after that as well, is I'm hoping to be able to announce at some stage the programme we've done in English football, we're going to do in Scottish football.
Yeah.
But I think we'll probably not start with Celtic and Rangers. I think we'll start with some of the other clubs and build up the normality of dealing with anti-Semitism. So that is absolutely on the agenda. I can assure everyone.
I don't want to retread ground, but can I ask you sort of an overarching question from a communal perspective? Do you think that by not hitting the problems hard at the beginning, we have as a country let this get away from us?
No, I don't think that's a fair criticism. It was under the last government, not this government. But I don't think that's a fair criticism, because most people didn't realise how big this was. When I rang up the CST, the chief executive of the CST, at 8:30 that Saturday morning, because I could see how big this was going to be. That's before we had any real details coming through at all. It was clear this was massive and the biggest thing in this world in my lifetime. That was very clear. But I think it took people time to comprehend it and then to think through what that then meant. And we weren't really prepared for it. We're prepared for anti-Semitism, prepared for spikes in anti-Semitism. We weren't we weren't prepared for this. And our universities, as an example, have been not even vaguely as bad as American, Canadian, and Australian universities. Not even vaguely. What's happened in the American universities dwarfs by so many degrees what's happened in our universities. And the reason for that is because we have been better prepared, better organized over the years. We have a Jewish student organization that's very well organized, and that's been a ballast. It's been very tough for them, very, very tough. But they've been well organized, and they have been very effective, very effective. That contrasts with the chaos in the United States and Canada, and in parts of Australia as well. And I think that's a good reflection of, it's been terrible, but actually in that there have been some very big positives. And the way the students have reacted and held together and toughened themselves up through it is one of the things that will come to be of huge benefit to the Jewish community and to the country for many decades to come.
Well, you and I first met when I was the chair of the Union of Jewish Students and you were the chair of the National Organisation of Labour Students. And I will say this to you, you weren't a simple man then and you aren't a simple man now, notwithstanding the protestations. But it's been a really helpful view, not just because the focus has been on positive things we can do, but also because when communities circle the wagons, and we have done that, and it's not a criticism of anybody in the community, apart from anything else, I've been part of it, but it is a response to outside pressure. It is really useful to hear somebody who is clearly sympathetic and understanding give us a bit of their view, because it isn't, I think, as bad as we necessarily think it is, and that is in itself helpful. I'm going to ask one more question and then I'm going to call an end to it, because an hour is, I think, enough, and that's when I was told I had to shut up anyway. But there has been quite a good question asked right at the bottom. Do you think anti-Semitism should be taught in schools as part of Holocaust studies?
To give a short answer, my priority is to have every teacher taught the basics on anti-Semitism. I think if we could achieve that, that would be a game changer.
Yeah.
I'm not optimistic yet on that, but things are moving in that direction a little bit. That would be the game changer. I think the idea that we could do it through and alongside Holocaust education. First, I would like to have a proper evaluation of the impact Holocaust education's had. We've never had that in this country.
No.
And I think we need to have that. My counterparts in some countries have had that, and they've got some disturbing conclusions. I don't agree with their conclusions. It's hard to argue with them because they've got some evidence.
Yeah.
Schools are absolutely critical in this. Teachers are critical. The fact we don't educate teachers shows that we will always have a bigger problem than we should. And I wish there was more of a concentration within the Jewish community on that message. By definition, teachers teach. We don't even have the materials to teach English teachers in English literature about the anti-Semitism of Dickens and Shakespeare when they're teaching English. we are not doing everything we need to do in this. And for me, that is probably the biggest single priority of them all, because that would be the game changer. And that would be generational. How can you expect a school to deal with an incident of anti-Semitism if there's no Jewish kids in the school, no Jewish teachers or staff, and nobody's taught anyone or trained anyone anything about anti-Semitism?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And it seems to me it's fairly obvious. It should be as routine as doing health and safety. You've got to do, and it's not a lot. You don't need to do a lot to get your head around the basics. But if you've never been challenged and educated on that, then we wonder why we've got a problem. And I think that would be phenomenal. And lobby your MPs. You've got half of them in the cabinet in Leeds these days. Lobby your MPs on that. Go see them. If the Leeds Rep Council and every other part of the Leeds community wanted to have an impact, you've got certainly got, I can think two immediately. You've got the Chancellor. You've got two members of the cabinet there. Put them on the spot very politely and say, why aren't you doing this? Because it could be done.
Well, that's a fair challenge and we will meet it. Can I say thank you for giving up your time? It really has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you again, and it's very good. It's very good of you to come and spend the time, and I'm very grateful to Jonathan Straight and Alan Benstock from Millim for allowing me the opportunity to talk to you about this. For those of you listening, I will put something up on the Facebook group that both gives you the address to write to, sends you a link to the site, and also will, I promise you, volunteer to coordinate responses if you don't wish to do your own. And we will coordinate anything from 2 or 3 pages to 1 or 2 lines, and we will preserve your anonymity, but it is really important that there is an evidence base for this.
And Simon, can I just exploit my position and say, in a week on Thursday, I'm coming to Leeds. I'm speaking with Tracy Ann Oberman after a performance of The Merchant of Venice, the Thursday performance, on the Battle of Holbeck Moor. And if you haven't seen her performance, you will understand why. Anyone who has any knowledge, not least from family members who were present in the Battle of Holbeck Moor, I would be very, very keen to hear from you. Indeed, I'm happy to come and visit you, because I'm going to write a book on it, because it's one of the big untold stories. We're not very good at telling stories when we win things. Well, the Jewish community played a pivotal role in that and doesn't talk about it. I'd like some of you, if you know something, to shout a little bit, or at least whisper to me, so I can note it down. So anyone, I will come and see anyone who has some family knowledge of the Battle of Holbeck Moor, September 1936.
We will get that on the group as well. We'll mine our community for you.
Thank you.
Don, thank you ever so much, and good luck. It's important work you're doing, and we are grateful for it.
And we are a literary festival, so when you have finished the book, please do come and tell us all about it, or better still, come in person, and we'll organise a live event. Thank you so much, Lord Mann, for sharing what is a unique perspective, and we're very grateful for your time. And also thank you, Simon, for your very insightful questions. Lord Mann, I'm going to send you a book of some of my photographs, which I hope you'll enjoy. Those will wing their way to you over the next few days. Thank you so much for being our guest this evening. Now, just a few words about our upcoming programme before we leave you in a couple of minutes. Our next event's on the 24th of February. We have a lady, Maya Arad, who is noted as the foremost Hebrew writer outside of Israel. And I'll be speaking to Maya about the first of her books to be published in the English language. This is called The Hebrew Teacher. And then on the 17th of March, Keith Khan Harris makes a welcome return to Millim to tell us about his new book, Everyday Jews, Why the Jewish People Are Not Who You Think They Are. We have much more in the pipeline. Please visit our website at millim.org.uk for more details. All of the online events we run are free, but you are welcome to make a donation if you wish. There is a link in the chat or on our website. We will also be dropping you a line with the details for submissions to Lord Mann if you would prefer to respond that way. So it remains for me to thank our guests, Lord Mann and Simon Myerson, once again. Thanks to you both, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again at a future event. And still, until then, stay safe. See you soon.